Hello and welcome to Writing with Steve. The poem we're considering today is Winter by Edwin Morgan. Before we start, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. It's free and all you have to do is press the button below. I have the poem here, so let's start. The year goes, the woods decay, and after many a summer dies, the swan on Bingham's pond, a ghost, comes and goes. It goes and ice appears, it holds, bears gulls that stand around surprised, blinking in the heavy light, bears boys when skates take over, swan tracks gone. After many summer dies, the swan white ice glints only crystal beyond white. Even dearest blue's not there, though poets would find it. I find one stark scene, cut by evening cries, by warring air. The muffled hiss of blades escapes into breath, hangs with it a moment, fades off, goes, the scene, the voices fade, the line of trees, the woods that fall, decay, and break, the dark comes down, the shouts run off into it and disappear. At last the lamps go too, when fog drives monstrous down the dual carriageway, out to the west, and even in my room, and on this paper, I do not know about that grey dead pane of ice that sees nothing and that nothing sees. This is a reflective poem. It is the writer's personal response to a winter scene. It is written in the first person, and the use of enjambment, run-on lines, gives it a conversational quality. It sounds like the speaker is speaking to us and to himself. The speaker observes a frozen pond in Glasgow. It makes him think about decay and the passing of time. Interestingly, the poet uses a cinematic technique to describe the scene and the passing of time. If you've ever watched time-lapse photography, where you can see a flower grow and blossom in 10 seconds, or a caterpillar turn into a butterfly super quickly, well, Morgan uses a similar technique. He presents several thumbnail sketches, vignettes, of what he sees at the pond. The swan swims on the pond, then later, when the pond freezes over, gulls land on it and boys skate on the ice. The scene is dynamic, ever-changing. The poet uses pathetic fallacy to create mood and present how the speaker is feeling. Pathetic fallacy is a technique where a character's emotions are reflected in their natural surroundings, including the weather. Ghost and dies associates the season with death and sets a melancholy mood. Words like decay, goes, and fades presents a bleak scene and creates a sombre mood. The poet writes in the present tense to make the experiences immediate. As these experiences unfold, we share them with him. Although the mood is melancholy, the speaker is often playful. He uses a pun, dies the swan and dies the swan, to reflect the lack of colour in the surroundings, but also to suggest that the speaker in the poem is a gifted writer. This is an important theme later on. And the use of the oxymoron, heavy light, a contradiction, makes the scene oppressive and dark. Even the gulls with their sharp eyes find it hard to see their surroundings in this occluded winter light. Swan white ice, heavy light ice and stark, presents a world drained of colour. For emphasis, the speaker says that even dearest blue is missing. Even what should be one of a poet's greatest gifts, that of describing what he sees in a way others have not considered before, is dulled. A poet should find the blue in this scene, perhaps a positive, but even he, a poet, finds himself unable to find anything positive and cheerful to write about. All he finds is one stark scene. The poet seems frustrated by his inability. Although the speaker describes the swan, the boys and the gulls, he does not interact with any of them. He is positioned outside, looking in. This distancing of the poet and speaker from all that he can see presents him as isolated and lonely. The poet uses hyperbole to stress how silent the scene is. By comparison, the sounds he hears seem violent. The skater's blades hiss, and the evening cries cut through the silence. There is warring air. This suggests he finds the intrusion of sound unpleasant. Perhaps they interrupt his thoughts. As part of this time-lapse technique, we experience the lamps go out and the boys skating further away into the darkness. This description reminds us that the speaker is alone. The descriptions also bring a finality. We are told, the dark comes down, the shouts run off into it and disappear. The lamps go too, smothered by the fog. The poet presents many vivid descriptions, particularly that of fog. When fog drives monstrous down the dual carriageway, the poet uses personification, giving something unliving the characteristic of something that is. The fog is a monster, a fearful beast. The fact that the fog is loose on the dual carriageway hints at danger, man's vulnerability in the face of nature. The fog could cause a fatal accident. It drives down the dual carriageway, perhaps causing mayhem. The reference to west also has associations with death. To go west is a euphemism for death, and the sun sets in the west. Near the end of the poem, we are transported to the poet's home. Instead of being a place of warmth and security, the poet curiously feels vulnerable. He sits studying his paper, perhaps what he has written or what he wants to write. Although a writer with the ability to take control of the situation, perhaps find a positive about winter, he cannot. He admits, I do not know about that dead grey pane of ice that sees nothing and that nothing sees. This is a sophisticated poem, open to multiple interpretations. So let's have a look at some of these. One interpretation is the poet's inability to explain death. Despite his eloquence and writing skills, he cannot explain the need for death. He does not know about the great dead pane of ice. He, like the ice, sees nothing and nothing sees. Ice has associations with cold and death. Another interpretation is that the poem is examining the writing process. The poem perhaps is examining the winter every writer faces, when thoughts will not flow, and she or he have to face that white blank space, writer's block. Morgan could be describing his artistic winter. He is unable to turn his observations of the winter day at the pond into writing. This returns us to his lament early in the poem that a poet would be able to see the dearest blue in the scene, but he cannot. What he sees should inspire his writing: the swan's inability to swim on the lake, the clumsy gulls, the boys skating, but he is unable to make these random scenes mean something. He resorts to borrowing from the work of other poets. The opening two lines are from the poem Tethonus by Alfred Tennyson. The poet knows we will recognise this. Also, the monstrous fog reminds us of the fog in T.S. Eliot's love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Perhaps like Prufrock, the poet speaker is having an existential crisis. His use of Tethonus is interesting. In legend, Tethonus was granted immortality, but not youth. He aged, but could not die. Eventually, he fades to a shadow in the woods. Perhaps the poet is comparing the gift of writing to the gift Tethonus was given. He finds, like Tethonus, his gift is limited. He has the gift of observation, as his description of the swan and the gulls demonstrate. However, he lacks the associated gift of knowing what he observes means. Observing without knowing to the poet is like immortality without youth. Like Tethonus, his gift is a burden rather than a benefit. As a poet, he perceives this lack of vision as a barrier. In the poem, barriers are a recurrent theme. The icy pond is a barrier that prevents the swan from swimming. The ice is like a cloudy window pane that cannot be seen through. This introduces another theme, that of the writer's vision. The poet laments his lack of knowledge. He cannot see beyond the ice and the winter scene and relate to the reader what it means. Like the gulls on the pond and the drivers on the fog-bound dual carriageway, he lacks vision. He has one gift, but needs a second: observation and knowledge. Perhaps the poem is also a reflection on the impenetrable secret of death. The poet presents us with a barrier. He compares winter to a window pane he cannot see through and beyond. Dead, grey and ice associates this barrier and the coldness death brings. The poet admits he can offer no insight into death because he does not know what death means. He can provide no answers or anything comforting. He compares the pain to a poet's blindness that sees nothing and nothing sees. He finds the conclusion he reaches discomforting. At the poet's end, there is no resolution. His conclusion that there is no explanation he can offer makes the ending nihilistic, a belief that the world is devoid of meaning. He uses repetition, nothing, to emphasize his conclusion. Yet the poem is ironic, because winter is a fine poem about the inability to write a poem. In context, Edwin Morgan was a Scottish poet. In 2004, he was named as the first Scottish national poet, the Scots Macker. Like Norman McCaig, whose work we studied in an earlier video, during the Second World War, Morgan was a conscientious objector and served with the Army Medical Corps. Perhaps his choice not to fight during the war suggests he valued life deeply. Therefore, winter, which brings death and the ending of things, is something he would find unsettling and make him feel melancholy. To explore this sophisticated poem, it is useful to consider the following questions. 1. Show how any two of the poet's uses of word choice effectively contribute to the main ideas or concerns of the poem. 2. Show how any two of the poet's uses of sound effect techniques effectively contribute to the main ideas or concerns of the poem. 3. How effective do you find any two aspects of the last 6 lines as a conclusion to the poem? Your answer may deal with ideas and/or language. I hope you found this poem interesting and my analysis helpful. If you haven't seen any of our other videos featuring poetry analysis, please don't forget to do so. One of our videos includes an analysis of Brooklyn Cop by Norman McCaig, who was a contemporary of Edwin Morgan. To keep updated on our videos, please hit the subscribe button. It's free to join. And also hit the like and ring the bell. Until next time, from Carol and me, write well.